So our final unit in perception has to do with emotions. And if you think about how emotions and self and perceptions are all connected, you can see that emotions play a big part in how we perceive not only information about others, but information about ourselves. If you remember back to the perception process, that process of interpretation and negotiation have a lot to do with emotions and the idea that getting someone to understand your perception or your perspective often includes emotionally having conversations about emotions. So we're going to take a minute and talk a little bit about how powerful emotions are with perception. So communication, we've decided, shapes our feelings, and feelings shape our communication. How we negotiate and interpret other people's behaviors, how we feel about it, often shapes what we communicate, and how other people communicate about their emotions with us shapes our communication and understanding. There's a term connected to emotions called emotional intelligence, and this is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions and be sensitive to others' feelings. So just like a high IQ or a low IQ, you can have a high emotional intelligence or a low emotional intelligence. You can have a low ability to understand your own emotions and be sensitive to others, or you can get good or have a high intelligence, emotional intelligence, and understand others' emotions and feelings much better than others. And ultimately that's the goal, because part of being in relationships and working in companies or having families, right, all of that is interpreting emotional communication and problem solving and dealing with anger and hurt and fear and love and happiness, right? All of those feelings, being able to understand how we feel and be sensitive to how others feel is part of what makes up the human experience in the end. High emotional intelligence is linked to a higher low self-esteem, a higher low life satisfaction, and self-acceptance. So there's where our self comes in, right? Being able to understand ourselves and our emotions helps our own acceptance of ourselves and also leads to higher life satisfaction and higher self-esteem. People who know how to express their emotions are healthier overall than those that don't. Think about the rise in our country of anxiety and depression and other mental health issues. Not that all are caused by emotional expression, but learning how to deal with those emotions can make you healthier and happier, more self-assured, less stress, help that mental health, make you more likely to engage in social activities, and lead to satisfying relationships, whether that's interpersonal relationships or relationships with yourself or romantic relationships. Whatever those relationships are, life is about relationships, and ultimately having a good ability to express emotions and understand others emotions will lead to that higher satisfying relationships. This was a study done by the New York Times in 2013, and they asked people to draw locations on themselves where they feel certain emotions. The lower one row being more complex emotions and the top being more simple. And if you look at this chart, I think it's pretty interesting where emotions are centered. Anger, I think you have these emotions in the mouth, right? The mouth area, in the fists, right? That maybe leads people to feel like they have to physically react. Fear, right? Mostly centered in the heart. The yellower the color, the hotter or the more people felt that emotion was there. Disgust in our stomach and our mouth. I really like happiness because it's one of the few emotions that seem to light people up everywhere, right? In their heart and in their head, but also in other parts of the body, they tended to feel happiness. So it's this overall emotion. Look how cold sadness was in terms of being in the eyes, right? We get some really visual eyes, and in the heart. Surprise, right? If surprise felt in the eyes, this is what they said they felt when they were neutral. Then you get down to more complex emotions. Compare like depression with happiness, right? A very, very stark contrast. Love, anxiety very, very much in the heart, right? I thought that was a really interesting one, that we often think anxiety is something in our head, but that chest, that tightening of the chest or the heart really leads to that feeling of anxiety. You have contempt, pride, right? More upper body, particularly in the mind, right? Pride is one of the few that is a mental. Shame, really focused on eyes, and envy sort of in the head and not the heart. So this is a really good visual of how emotions can be so overpowering, and where people feel those emotions, and sort of this physical reaction or physical connection we have to emotional intelligence and to emotions in general. We flip back to this. So the first step in really understanding your emotions is to recognize how you feel. There's a difference between feeling and talking about it. So the first thing you have to do is pay attention to the signs and the perception that you're getting when you feel an emotion, and build that emotional vocabulary so that you can identify it, and try and gain a larger emotional vocabulary. Try and build singular words like angry, depressed, curious, frustrated, bothered, right? The bigger vocabulary we have, emotional vocabulary we have, the better we're able to identify emotion. Too often in our society, we tend to leave emotion out of our communication. We'll substitute the word feel instead, and instead of saying what we actually feel. I feel like going to a movie, or I feel like we're seeing too much of each other. That's not a feeling, right? You need to add emotional content to help raise that emotional intelligence. So by adding emotional content, I'm bored, I want to go to a show, or I'm frustrated, I want to see less of you, right? That's very direct, and obviously there are better ways to say it, but adding that emotional content will help us get better at identifying emotions, which can then lead again to all those benefits of having a higher emotional intelligence: happiness, self-assured, less stressed, better mental health, satisfying relationships, because we're able to express our emotions in a clear and concise way. Then you have to decide, okay, I've been able to identify it and to name it. Do I take action on this emotion? There's been some research to say that emotions are like waves, and that often when we first feel them, they overpower us. And acting in that moment when we first feel the emotion, is often not the best idea. Sometimes that's why they say, if you're really angry, write an email to someone and then just leave it in your drafts folder for a day or two and then come back to it. They used to say write a letter and not send it. Or just telling somebody, I can't talk about this right now, I need some time to process it. It's totally acceptable to do that and to wait for that wave of emotion or whatever it is that's so emotionally charging you to subside, so that you can think with a more logical mind. If you look back at that map, right? Think about how compromised you are when you feel that emotion so intensely, in terms of like, how easy is it to speak when your head is full of anger or shame, right? Those types of emotions. So waiting for those feelings to subside a little bit will help us speak with a clearer head and understand ourselves better. The best way to express emotions is through I language, to take responsibility for your feelings. Instead of giving the other person power over your emotions, you choose how you feel. So instead of saying to someone, you hurt my feelings, that takes away all your power. You chose to be hurt. So say, I'm getting angry. Say what that feeling is that you're feeling there. I am frustrated because I feel left out, instead of you left me out. There's one thing I could teach you, is that, in this class, besides perception checking, which is a great skill, is to not let other people be in charge of how you feel and not give them the power of changing how you feel. So instead of allowing yourself to be a victim to other people's choices and sort of a victim to your own emotions, own those emotions and decide that you're in charge of how you feel. And if you feel hurt, acknowledge that and know that you have the power to change that. Too often we like to blame others for our own feelings when really we chose to feel that way. So taking back your power and not giving it to others with emotions in particular. Actually, right now, you're going to stop and you're going to practice using I language on a handout. So take just a minute on the handout that's given to you and rewrite the phrases instead of using I language or you language, using I language and stating the emotions that are felt. So pause the video right now and take a minute and do that handout, share within your group, and then come back to the lecture. Okay, you've had some practice. Now let's move on to the differences in difficult emotions. So there are two options with emotions. Emotions can either be facilitative or debilitative. And when you think about a facilitative emotion, it facilitates or it leads you to action, where a debilitating emotion debilitates you. It makes you unable to act. And there's a couple of indicators on how emotion becomes facilitative or debilitative. The first is the intensity. So some fear and anger is okay, but if you're too afraid or you're too angry all the time, it can become debilitating. So you have to weigh, how long have I felt this emotion? Do I feel this all the time? Think about depression and sadness, right? It becomes a debilitative emotion if not handled properly, because it can change the way you live your life. How long are you feeling it? The duration. So a relationship is over, it's normal to feel depressed, but if it's months and months and months, then you need to reevaluate and find some ways to change that debilitating emotion into a facilitated emotion. Staying angry for someone at a long time can actually cause you more problems than it ever causes them. This is actually a term called rumination, and it's where these feelings just sort of sit inside you and just ruminate, and you go over them again and again and again, and it can really lead to a less satisfying life because you're hanging on to these emotions. So it's becoming debilitative because you can't let it go. The next thing you need to evaluate is, let me click this, is the fact that sometimes our genetic makeup can influence our emotions. Some people are predispositioned to depression and other mental struggles, right? So knowing that your genetics may be working against you or may have a part in how you feel certain emotions can help you turn a debilitating emotion into a facilitative. It can help you overcome that. Emotional memory, these are really interesting. We talked about this before with fields of experience and the models of communication. The fact that you have connections or emotional feelings that can be triggered by certain emotions. So you feel lonely one day and that triggers an overall feeling of loneliness that you've had, from another relationship or another time in your life. So you're not just feeling lonely in the moment, you're feeling all the emotional memories that are connected to those feelings of loneliness or loss, or even positive ones like love or happiness, right? We can call back upon other times when we felt that emotion, and it can become facilitative or debilitating. What you say to yourself in that moment when you're feeling that emotion can also lead an emotion to be debilitating or facilitating. If you keep talking yourself into this sort of negative self-talk and a negative emotion, you can spiral down even more, as opposed to the positive self-talk that you can encourage yourself to move on and turn that emotion into facilitative emotion. So how you talk to yourself has a big influence on whether or not the emotion is positive or negative. So notice, if you want to help if you want to help change debilitating emotions, there's a couple of things you can do. Monitor your reactions to certain things. Are there certain people that lead you to be more angry and frustrated or sad or happy? Certain events, certain times of year, certain topics. That way you can sort of prepare and plan and be ready for that, or avoid those people that really lead you to debilitating emotions. You can record your self-talk in a journal or just in a notebook where you're trying to keep track of what you say to yourself when you're feeling those emotions. Is it positive or negative? Are you facilitating more negative emotions by the way you talk to yourself, or is it turning into a positive thing? Sometimes stepping back and reappraising your emotional beliefs, asking yourself, am I being rational? Am I feeling this way because I'm overcome by emotion, or am I feeling this way because it's a rational reaction? And if it's irrational, then what's another way you can handle this in the future? What's another way you can go about dealing with this emotion in the future and sort of have a plan for when it happens again? Unfortunately, thinking rationally doesn't eliminate all debilitating emotions. Some are very rational. Losing a loved one, it is a very rational reaction to be very sad when you lose someone that you love, right? But then we go back to duration and how long and the intensity and the self-talk, and make sure that we're able to be functional. The joy of getting into college, apprehension about the future, like some emotions are rational. We just have to learn to feel them, acknowledge them, and keep going, keep turning them into facilitated emotions. There's a couple of fallacies that are connected with emotion that lead to more negative emotions. The first fallacy is the fallacy of perfection. And this is that we expect ourselves to be perfect in how we handle emotional situations and communication. And fallacy means flaw. This is a flaw, that nobody handles every emotional situation perfectly. So don't be too hard on yourself if your emotions get the best of you, or if you feel like you can't get a handle on a certain emotion. It's totally normal, and we sometimes make ourselves think that we have to be perfect with emotions, and we don't. We just have to reflect and keep moving forward. The second fallacy is called the fallacy of approval, and this is the idea that everybody needs to be okay with our choices and our ideas, and that we need to get the approval of everyone, and stepping back and realizing that that's impossible, and sacrificing your own happiness to make others happy can lead to some debilitating emotions. It doesn't mean you need to be selfish and always think of yourself first. It just means that you need to be doing what the only approval that matters the most is your own. So stop seeking for the approval of others, because it's a flaw and it leads to really frustrating and debilitating emotions. This is a really powerful one, the fallacy of shoulds. Even as an adult, I find myself running into this all the time. This is the inability to distinguish what is and what should be. There's some ridiculous ideas here. People ought to live forever. We should be able to fly, right? Those are ridiculous, and we can't, right? But sometimes we think people should be a certain way, and we're furious because they're not. For example, I sometimes get really frustrated with my brother and sister-in-law. They tend to dominate our family activities. We tend to work around their schedule because they can't compromise. I feel like they take advantage of my parents sometimes, and my parents' time and energy. And for a long time, my sisters and I would really get frustrated and start talking about what they should be doing. They should be more respectful of my parents' things and their time. They should understand that we're not able to go on our family vacation during this week so that they can go on another family vacation another week, right? They should be able to discipline their kids a little bit better so that getting together isn't chaos. And so we would get so frustrated and get in this endless loop of conversation about what they should be doing. And it wasn't until we kind of stepped back and said, yes, they probably should be behaving be behaving better, but they are not. And unless we want to address this, through some perception checking and some good communication, which we didn't think would really make a difference, then we need to come to a place where we're okay with how they are and make it work for us. So it took a long time, but we eventually changed some of our dynamics and the way we communicated with them so that we weren't always so frustrated about how they should be and just understood that this is how they are. So maybe your friends should be more understanding, or you should work harder, but you're not, and they're not. So the more we can understand that that's the case, we can let go of that irrational frustration and learn to just deal with things as they are. That fallacy of shoulds is such an important one, I think, because sometimes we just get so frustrated with what people should be when they're never going to be. And the more we can get comfortable with that, the better we can feel and move on. Wishing for someone to change is okay, but you have to be really careful that you don't insist everything happens the way you want it to happen. There are 3 consequences to the fallacy of shoulds. It leads to unnecessary happiness. Complaining without acting can keep you really unsatisfied, and it makes you really defensive with others. So how I helped myself be more understanding of my brother and sister-in-law is I changed should to wish. I wish they would be more considerate of my parents, but they aren't. And here's what I can do to compensate for that. I wish that they would do this. And that helps our brain really come to terms with the way things are. So wishing instead of should helps our brain rationalize what behavior a little bit. The 4th fallacy is the fallacy of overgeneralization. I hear students do this one all the time. We base a belief on a limited amount of information. I'll hear students say, "Oh, I can't believe I dropped my backpack. I'm such a klutz," or "I'm so stupid. I can't even pass this math quiz." We exaggerate what people are based on one thing. Just because you can't figure out a math quiz doesn't make you dumb, right? Like, that's just one thing. And so we tend to overgeneralize. We do this with other people too. You're always late, when really they've been late just the last 2 times. You've been late the last 3 times, being very specific. Or I can't think of anything, or I can't think of any ideas today, right? Really narrowing down our shortcomings so that we don't keep telling ourselves these huge overgeneralizations and end up really hurting our self-concept and really causing some debilitating emotions. The next one is the fallacy of causation. This goes back to the you and the I language, the irrational belief that emotions are caused by others rather than our own self-talk. And we talked about this earlier, but the idea that you get caught up in how other people make you feel some way, but that's actually not the case, right? You don't make people angry, they are angry. The other day, I think I offended a teacher at lunch. I was eating lunch with some teachers, and a lot of events happened, and I really felt like at the end of the lunch that I needed to apologize, because I felt like just based on behavior and some things that were said, that I had offended somebody. So I sent an email to this teacher and I apologized sincerely, and I really hoped that they didn't take offense, but if they did, let them know that that wasn't my intention. And this teacher never responded. And for a long time, I was, at least through the weekend, I've been pretty frustrated with the lack of response. I've been wanting to say, accept my apology, let's move on. But I finally had to realize that I am not in control of how this teacher feels, right? If I offended them and apologized and they're still offended, that's on them, right? I did my best to sort of offer sincere apologies and explain why I was doing what I was doing and be sincere and empathetic. But if they choose not to accept my apology, I can't make that my fault because I was genuine about that. So really taking ownership and realizing that we can only do the best we can, and then other people's emotions are on them. Obviously, we don't want to go around offending everybody and being selfish, right? But if we genuinely do something by accident or apologize sincerely, then that's on them if they choose to forgive you or not. You are not the cause of their emotions, and they are not the cause of yours. That's the fallacy of causation. You determine the way you react, not others. The next one is called the fallacy of helplessness. This is the idea that we blame some of our emotions or our life satisfaction on forces outside of our control. So I hear students say all the time, well, I was just born shy. There's nothing I can do about it. Or I'm not good at math. I just can't fix that, right? This sort of idea of like not being able to change things, and we, instead of just saying I don't want to be better at math or I don't want to be outgoing, we sort of make it the way things are without our control. And basically these are just justifications for not wanting to change. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you are shy and that's what you want to be, then own that instead of blaming it on some sort of abstract personality assignment when you were born, right? Just own it. And the more that I do that, the better I feel like I communicate. And if I say to people, I really like to go to this party, but I'm just not feeling like I want to go today, right? Like instead of just saying, oh, I'm an introvert, there's nothing I can do about it, trying to own those emotions a little bit better and not feeling so helpless or out of control. Another source of debilitating emotions can be the fallacy of catastrophic expectations, operating on the thought that if something bad can happen, it will. So sort of having this self-fulfilling prophecy of if I invite them to the party, then they won't come. Or if I apply for the job, I won't get hired. Like telling ourselves that it's already going to be bad before we even begin. And you just kind of have to think through both sides. What's the source? Are you feeling insecure? Do you feel underqualified? What is it that's causing you to feel this sort of catastrophic expectation? And you can see how these will easily become debilitating. That ends our discussion on emotions. So hopefully you can kind of see the connection between emotions and perception, and really self-concept and self-esteem, and really getting better at emotional expression can help build both.